Thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon. Apologies for the massed hordes watching online for the late start. My name is Darren Sanders. I'm the Liberal Democrat Councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner. I'm also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Tackling Homelessness. Welcome all. I have to begin by some fire safety information and also a bit of explanation about people who have the luck of observing this meeting this afternoon. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the fire marshal regulations of the Guildhall Trust, whose building we're in, anyone who's signed in at the reception desk, please sign out. Live web streaming, hello. Everyone speaking via a microphone will be on camera, sorry. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly they do not wish to be recorded. We're delighted that Toby, the local government reporter from the news, is here, so that applies to you. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when they have finished. Here ends the homily. We have no deputation requests. We have 2 apologies for absence, which is Councillor Spencer Gardner, who's the Conservative spokesman for Housing and Tackling Homelessness, and Councillor Ghosh, who is the Labour spokesman for Housing and Tackling Homelessness. Just so we can introduce everybody, I'm going to start with 2 people who are here to observe the meeting. One is my opposite number in Sutton Council, South London, Councillor Jake Short, who chairs the Housing, Business and Economy Committee in London, in Sutton, and the other one is Lois Lanning, who is my life organiser. Clearly is here, I think, just to sort of get her life back, really. So I'll introduce everyone else, primarily for those 2's benefit, and also possibly young Toby over there, just in case he doesn't. I will start on my left with Alison.
Alison Harper, I'm from Democratic Services.
I will now move along the back row and then snake forward. So I'll start with young Alan.
Hi, Alan Denford, Finance Manager for Housing, Neighbourhoods and Building Services.
Good afternoon, Nicola Clanahan, Head of Housing Community Services at the City Council. I just wanted to add that Mark and Mandy from the Residents' Consortium have passed on their apologies for this meeting.
Thank you. Alison, could you add that, please? And Nicola, if they have any particular comments about any of the reports, can that be relayed to all of us? If not now, then afterwards, and we'll take them on board if required. Thank you, Nicola. Sally.
Yes, hello, I'm Sally Scatcherd, Assistant Director for Housing.
Yep, good afternoon, Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing.
We now move to the middle row, my right to my left.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Adam Hardwick, Assistant Director of Buildings.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Patrick Leggett, Head of Capital Projects.
Mike Swan, Commission Support and Safeguarding Manager, Housing Needs Advice and Support.
Jo Bennett, Assistant Director, Housing Need and Supply.
And Shane Galvin, Head of Housing Needs Advice and Support.
And finally, in the cheap seats,
Councillor Raymond from Copner Ward.
Thank you. Ray is also the housing spokesman for the Portsmouth Independence Party. Just for Jake and Lois's benefit, what I do, is choose to have various people actually say what they think, and then I try and sum up on each item. As it's only Ray today, this may be a bit shorter than normal, but we also strangely have all read the reports. So if there's any... I didn't realise the live stream was that bad. If there are any reports at all, please assume that we've actually read them, which is a shock, I know. But it may be quite useful. So I'll start with probably one of the most important reports we're going to have in a while, which is approving PCC's allocations policy. Young Shane.
Thank you. So this is a report to present and propose a new allocations policy for Portsmouth. The allocations policy is the policy which dictates how social housing is allocated in the city. It's recommended that the new policy and associated dependencies are approved. Just by way of background, most here will be familiar with the action within the homelessness strategy, calling for a review of the current allocations policy. The council is required to have such a policy, but the current one has not been reviewed since 2019, since when the homelessness picture in Portsmouth has changed significantly, as it has nationally, and the resulting impact on the Portsmouth Housing Register is significant. What we've seen is a greater proportion of households who are housed being homeless households. What that's done in turn is resulted in fewer properties coming back to the council for onward allocation. The knock-on impact of that is also that the high band of the housing register has become increasingly oversubscribed, and those with a low or medium level of priority have only a rare opportunity to be housed through the housing register. So, as you'll be aware, consultation took place over the summer, whereby specific attempts were made to engage with households that are currently on the housing register, with partner registered providers in the city, and with partner organisations, including members of a homeless partnership board. The consultation report summarising those findings can be found at Appendix 3 of the report. They led to the proposed policy that is in front of you today. The policy seeks to make better use of the limited stock available to us by increasing the overall number of lets, primarily by ensuring more properties go to existing tenants so as to free up the resulting properties for onward allocation to others. The policy also would enable dynamic adjustments to how many properties go to certain groups of applicants so that local demands and pressures can be responded to. So just in terms of increasing the number of properties through the housing register by increasing the number of transfers, this will be done by categorising all applicants on the register into one of three groups. So, homeless households that are currently accommodated by the council, existing tenants of Portsmouth City Council or registered providers of social housing, and all other non-transfer applicants. By categorising all applicants into these three groups, and reserving a certain percentage of lets to go to each of these groups, the council can ensure more transfers are created, thus increasing the overall number of properties available for let, so more people can be helped with their housing while still continuing to house those that are homeless and threatened with homelessness. So the example at the report 5.3.7 is a hypothetical one with potential percentages to be used, and it's derived from historical data and projections, but is included just to demonstrate how effective this change could be. In that example, if 40% of lets were reserved to transfers, between 27 and 30% were reserved for homeless households in temporary accommodation, and the remaining were reserved for all other applicants, it's projected that an additional 20% or so moves could be achieved over the course of 2 years, thus housing over 350 additional households. Further, the policy seeks to introduce chain lettings. There's a hypothetical example again included in the report, whereby one property could in this example be turned into 5 households being rehoused. Chain lettings would be used in a minority of situations, so as the policy continues to prioritise those with the most urgent need and who've waited the longest. But where used, it could make better use of the stock available. A recent pilot saw us turn 5 empty properties into 18 households being rehoused, with 5 resultant properties still remaining available for onward allocation. Further changes include the changing of the priority bands to be known as the recognised, significant and urgent priority bands. This is to convey the significance of people's real housing situations, so as they're not referred to as low or medium priority. Further changes include additional priority being reserved for current and former members of the armed forces and care experienced people who've been in the care of Portsmouth City Council. These are groups of people who the council owes a duty of care, and by reserving the additional priority for these relatively small groups of people, there's a very limited impact on other households on the register, but a very significant improvement in the chances of those groups of people. And finally, just to summarise a few of the other more significant changes proposed by the policy, there's the opportunity to take a more sensitive and selective approach when letting properties in areas of known and persistent areas of antisocial behaviour, with the aim of reducing such impact on neighbours and the wider community. There's a codification of the approach already taken in terms of households experiencing significant disrepair in their property, such as damp and mould, and how the council should respond to that. And there's a greater degree of choice and flexibility allowed for those households willing to leave their larger property, thus freeing it up for a family who needs that 3 or 4 bedroom property, for example. It's proposed that the policy would be effective from the 20th of November of this year and would affect applications, would affect current and existing registrations as well as new applications.
Shane, thank you very much for that. Ray, did you have anything to comment on at all? Or question at all? No, that's lovely. Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, if that's all right, Shane. The first one revolves around people with disabilities, not just physical disabilities, but also learning disabilities as well, particularly people with autism, which is something I've had in the last week or so. Many of the comments were, why don't you prioritise disabled people? Is there anything in the allocations policy that does that?
Yes, absolutely. So if a household is experiencing a problem with their property, whereas the property is having an impact on their health or disability, be it physical or mental disability, be it a learning disability or neurodivergence, they'll be assessed based on their individual need and the level of impact awarded. So, for example, if that property is having a very significant impact on their well-being, that could result in them being awarded a medium, or what I propose to be significant level of priority, or a high, or what I propose to be urgent level of priority.
2 more questions. What is a dynamic adjustment?
Yeah, sure. So this is a proposal that those percentages that are reserved, so in the example given where the percentages sit at 40, between 27 and 30%, and then 30 and 33%, that is just an example. And what would need to happen in reality is current demand be analysed, current homelessness demand be analysed, analysis of who is on the housing register and whether they're existing tenants or not, so that those percentages are then adjusted according to those findings.
So it's actually making it easier for certain types of groups, depending upon the situation, certain types of human people, actually to get a home.
That's the aim.
Excellent. If it's the practice, that's even better. Why the 20th of November start date?
That's to allow time for some of the mechanics to be rolled in terms of IT and working practices, and for us to contact those households currently on the housing register to inform them how this would affect their application.
Okay, thank you for that, Shane. I have a few comments, if this is all right, colleagues. This is long overdue, I have to say. I'm pretty sure all of us, Ray and everyone and the other 40 of us, frankly, get a lot of housing casework going, can I move, please? And why aren't you moving me? I think all of us are fully aware of the housing constraints that exist in the city, which is why we spent £72 million trying to buy back more than about 500 homes, which is the right thing to do, as well as building homes, which we'll come to in a bit. But it is also about just trying to make sure it's easier for people who are homeless to have homes, and also trying to make sure that people are moved in the right home. There's been a lot of, the coverage I've seen has focused on veterans, which is perfectly understandable, totally fine. But as you've outlined, Shane, there are plenty of other people, such as people with physical disabilities and neurodivergences, who will benefit from this. It will provide 20%, roughly, more moves than exist now for each of the next 2 years. That's rather good. It won't solve everybody's problem. People will think it will, but it won't. But what it will do is it will make a significant benefit for people in this city. So on that basis, if it's going to deliver 20% more moves, I'm happy, and I think we should approve this and continue. And if we can start before the 20th of November, that will be a joyful experience for all of us. That is a polite suggestion. Okay? Excellent. But that really is great work, and thank you very much, guys. That's great. Right, item number 4, we've talked about moving people. We're now talking about building things. Bunting Gardens in Havant Council Housing Developments. This is either Patrick or Joe. Patrick.
Yes, it's me, thanks. This is a decision report in relation to Bunting Gardens housing development, seeking that the Cabinet member notes the capital expenditure that's previously been approved and approve the construction of the development to Passive House standard. Just to give a bit of background, there was a report previously taken in March 2021 outlining the potential development to 3 sites in Weecock Farm, which included Bunting Gardens, Robin Gardens and Partridge Gardens, for which capital budget was approved. Alongside this was a report into energy efficiency standards that outlined the potential to build to a Passive House standard, and it requested that the report be brought back at various stages, including designing to Passive House, which is this report, after construction and after occupation to review its effectiveness. The proposals are for 3 4-bed, 8-person family homes, which will be allocated by Portsmouth City Council, which have been already approved for planning permission, and we have tender costs back. We tendered 2 options as a comparison. One option was to build to building regulation standards and Havant's planning design standards, and also a second option, which was a more energy efficient option designed to Passive House. Just to explain the context of Passive House, there is a highly efficient, energy efficient form of construction. It adopts a fabric first approach to minimise the need for heating, and this is through high levels of insulation in the building fabric, for example in the walls and the roofs of the building. It is constructed with very airtight barriers in the construction to minimise heat loss, and has a mechanical ventilation system to filter incoming air and exchange heat between fresh air that's coming in and extracted air to maintain a constant temperature, and also uses solar gains to efficiently warm the roofs. Following the evaluation of the 2 options, the Passive House has come back at less than 1% more expensive than the standard building regs option, and we are seeking a decision to proceed for this development to Passive House. Some of the key benefits for this development will be obviously the provision of good quality large family homes. Some of the key Passive House benefits would be significantly lower heating bills to residents, improved air quality within homes, more consistent temperatures within the dwellings, a very low risk of damp and mould occurring, and heating and ventilation systems that are simple to use in nature for the residents. The development should also ensure a higher standard of construction due to vigorous inspection and testing requirements of third-party Passive House certification, including the dedicated Passive House champion on site, whose job is to check for air tightness and quality throughout the build. There's also potential for lower maintenance costs in the future due to the fabric first approach that's been adopted, and future-proofs the homes against potential expensive retrofit developments in the future to bring buildings up from current building regulation standards to better quality standards in the future. It should be noted that the decision to build Passive House is in relation to the Bunting Gardens development specifically, and other developments will be assessed on their own merits, considering practical aspects and financial viability depending on the sites. Just to give a bit of further context about the Bunting Gardens design in general, it's been designed to a set of principles, design standards that we've adopted from resident feedback of previous developments, which is now quite a significant document. Just to highlight some of the adopted principles that have been delivered in this design, it would be things like understanding how our residents live in our homes and adapting the designs to those principles, larger sized properties for larger families, above the design standard minimum space standards, to have good storage within dwellings, 2 living areas, all bedrooms to be double bedrooms to prevent overcrowding as much as possible, and adequate garden provision and parking. We will also undertake post-occupation work for this development to further expand on our design principles. Just to note, the proposed development has the properties at 154 metres squared per dwelling, and the national minimum standard is 130 metres squared, which is more than 5% increase in floor area. And finally, just to put context in the programme of this development, it's programmed to start in the new year and will be on site for approximately 12 months.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. I forgot to do something earlier, which was to ask the councillors here, and others, Ray, whether he has anything interesting to declare. I'm assuming that's no. I don't either, so that's lovely. Ray, you may not have anything interesting to declare, but do you have any questions about this?
More of a comment than a question. Since we had the briefing about this a couple of weeks ago, I've done my internal research on this type of building, and it seems to be the way to go. It does seem very, very appropriate with climate change and everything else that's going on, and also standard of living. One thing I would say is there going to be provision for maybe a wet room or a shower room in the property, or properties, should I say, just in case that they have a problem with later down the line of someone that may need that facility?
Patrick?
Yes, the design standards, it's been designed to allow for a WC or shower room on every floor of the property, which have been future-proofed with drains in accordance with Part M2, should they need to be converted into wet rooms.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for that comment as well. I think one of the problems of being the biggest landowner in Havant, and the biggest landlord in Havant, is you have to go with Havant and Hampshire's policies, not necessarily ours. But I too am delighted that we're doing that to help people with physical disabilities as well. This is yet another example of our commitment to building more homes, and actually building greener homes as well. There is, as I've said before at various meetings, no Planet B, and so it is absolutely essential that we have homes that are as green as possible. This will often mean we will deliver the passive house standard. We won't always mean that, but it means that where we can, we will. And that is really excellent news. I'm particularly interested about what we're going to do to help our tenants with this. I have an old version of passive house development in my own ward, whereby the housing association gave them everything and forgot to tell them how to do it and how to work it, which means nothing happened, which is a bad thing. But I'm assured that we are much better than that. Because this is absolutely essential, and I want to see more of it. Thank you very much. So I think on that basis, Alison, this is approved, and we can start work. I look forward to seeing people in it. So Patrick, thank you and the team for all the hard work. That's really, really good news. Thank you very much. Right, the next item is a report, an update on our home ownership policies from Mark. This is related to us taking over 800 plus homes in various parts of Hampshire from Clarion Housing.
It is, thank you very much, Darren. So as you say, the report brings an update on our right to buy policy and also a brand new policy for shared ownership. We're bringing the reports to you today, as you say, as a consequence of our stock transfer from Clarion, which means we're now housing and looking after shared owners, which we've never done before, and also because of the consumer standards and the regulator for social housing, we're now trying to bring all of our policies into line and reviewing all of our policies, going through the same process, but in terms of the right to buy policy, it is only a review, not a new policy. We've got a new policy officer who is working with all of the staff within the local authority and with our resident groups to, as I say, refresh and bring new policies to the table to ensure we meet those standards. And the right to buy and shared ownership policies are attached as appendices. They're written to ensure that we meet our legislative and regulatory changes, and also to ensure that our new shared owners have been fully consulted with in terms of what the new shared ownership policy is going to provide to them, and there are about just over 100 shared owners that we've consulted with. And that's all I want to say, really. Thank you very much.
That's absolutely fine, Mark. Thank you very much for that. Ray, did you have anything on this at all? No? Okie doke. Thank you very much for bringing this. I'm delighted that the response to us taking over the 800 Clarion properties appears to have been quite positive for the residents. I'm equally delighted that Clarion gave a presentation on how they've changed, which looks suspiciously like how we do things, which can only benefit even more residents across the country. This is very pleasing. We have to do this. We're particularly interested about shared ownership, particularly if we want to try and assist people in their aspirations within the crowded housing market in the city. This is what's called an information policy, but the important thing is to actually make sure that people, the wider public, know about a lot of the work that we're doing, rather than just also taking decisions. So I don't have to pass this on or actually say anything about it, which may be good, but that's very pleasing, and long may it continue. And if there are any other issues that crop up along the way, please let us know, and don't feel afraid to come back to these things. So that's fine. The next one is one I do have to decide on, which is our water hygiene policy. I hope all water is hygienic. Steve.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for our new water hygiene policy that outlines our approach to managing water systems to help reduce the risk of Legionella in all of our HRA assets only. The background to this is the Legionnaire's disease is a potentially fatal form of pneumonia. It's contracted by inhaling small droplets of water suspended in the air. In terms of the corporate health and safety policy, highlights that service directors do have a responsibility to ensure their service has appropriate arrangements for managing the risk of Legionella. The policy does link into the regulator of social housing consumer standards, specifically regarding safety and quality standard. The policy itself is consistent with the format of all the HMB policies that have been recently updated. And that is to enable all residents to be able to review the policy and recognise the structure of the policy when they're looking at it, so it's easier for them to follow. The policy outlines the approach to managing our water systems to help reduce the risk of Legionella, and the scope, as I said earlier, does cover all of our HRA assets. The policy goes into detail to outline the duty holder and responsible person roles, and confirms that specialist contractors have to be members of the Legionella Control Association, the LCA. All buildings with communal water storage tanks and associated pipework shall have to have a current and compliant Legionella risk assessment. No risk assessments are required for individual single residential properties. In terms of the risk assessments, they identify any measures that are required to remove or reduce the risk of Legionella, and these will always be reviewed and carried out in a timely manner, either as responsive repairs or as a planned improvement to the building. The risk assessments will be reassessed a maximum of every 2 years, and having oversight of the whole policy and the processes will be a water hygiene safety panel that will be chaired by the head of compliance. The role of the panel will be to coordinate and communicate water safety across all of housing and have oversight of the processes, changes to legislation. From a resident perspective, the policy does outline their responsibility to regularly clean and disinfect shower heads, and obviously to inform us if any hot water systems are not working properly. From a resident consultation perspective, that has been undertaken with the recently formed Resident Policy Focus Group that has been established to regularly provide opportunity for consultation with any new and updated policies. The policies has been shared with all the members of the Resident Policy Focus Group, and we did receive written responses from some of the residents regarding their feedback, all of which were supportive of the policy, and there were no objections raised or any comments to change any aspects of the policy. In-person meetings were also held with the Policy Focus Group, and the resident engagement team rang all the members of the focus group to seek verbal feedback as well. Again, all the feedback was positive and there was no adverse comments. In terms of implementing the policy, The policy will, alongside with all of our other policies, will be on the PCC website, and there will be regular articles in House Talk highlighting the policies, where to locate them, and any advice to residents. Information regarding the policy will always be available, and HMB staff, particularly those who are involved in managing water safety, will be updated about the policy through the HMB bulletins, and we'll have links to the e-learning for Legionella awareness. The policy does change previous arrangements where risk assessments were done every 3 years and now will be done every 2 years. So that implementation will be managed by the recently appointed water hygiene engineer to ensure that we remain compliant going forward. That's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks for that, Steve. Ray, did you have anything on this at all?
Yeah, just one. As you said about properties that are tank fed, they're being checked annually. Are any checks being done on properties that are being re-let? And I know Darren's going to love this statement. Just to check that there are no dead legs in the system that could cause a problem.
Yeah, so all of our void properties, the contractors are aware of the process for managing Legionella. Obviously, if in void properties, we would take any opportunity to get rid of any dead legs. And also, as part of our void standard, the contractors do have an obligation to make sure they regularly flush through the systems so that if a property's been left empty for a period of time, there's no stagnated water.
Thank you very much. I got educated throughout that particular session on what a dead leg was. Apparently it's not a leg. And apparently it's not dead either, which is impressive, I have to say. This is just one question, Steve, really. I get people from time to time come to me and going, you know, I don't want anyone coming into my council flat. I don't see the need anyone walking in. It's my flat. It's my freedom. If people don't want people to come in and check for Legionella, what happens?
I don't think that's particularly an issue because what the policy actually relates to is communal water systems. So it's about checking communal water tanks that are in the roof spaces or in communal areas where we can gain access. And I think that the reason why there's no need to go into individual properties is because they're flushing through naturally by living in the property very regularly. So there's less likelihood of it being stagnated water.
Thank you for that clarification. That's very kind of you. Several of these policies that we're going to have a chat about this afternoon are put through the policy focus group that we have established, which is very, very pleasing. It's absolutely essential that the people who are on the receiving end of all these policies actually have an input in them. I'm particularly impressed with some of the collets which say, you're following all the safety protocols, so it's fine by me. Well done, council. As someone who's a regular avid reader of social media, I accept that the council may not always get these glowing comments, and indeed sometimes it gets an F- for performance, which I think is completely unfair and lies, but that's politicians for you. So I'm pleased that we're actually going through this process. We're actually involving local people in the setting of the things that affect them. That's absolutely essential. And this is just designed to make sure everybody's safe. And that's the most important thing, the most important duty that we have. So on that basis, I'm happy to proceed. Steve, thank you very much for your time. Next on our list is the long-titled Rent and Service Charge Setting Policy for Housing Revenue Account-Owned Social Housing. We wish we could do it for the private rented sector as well, but we can't. So, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as you say, it's got a very long title. Again, because of the regulator for social housing and the consumer standards, we have created and produced a rent and service charge setting policy. It follows the procedure that we've always followed. We've just got a written procedure and a policy now that again has been through the resident consortium, the policy feedback group, and has had quite a lot of comments and clarification items that we've now included within the policy itself. So, as I say, it's written because we are a social landlord. We're regulated by the social regulator. We've got 15,400 stock or thereabouts and 2,000 leaseholders, and it will cover the way that we increase our rents on an annual basis, but also all the other charges that we increase, so around garages, parking spaces, laundry facilities, and other charges, but predominantly it covers rents, both social rents and affordable rents, and our service charges, which predominantly for tenants are fixed service charges, but we do now, because of the stock transfer, have some that are variable service charges, and then all of our leasehold service charges and shared ownership service charges, which are variable as well. I think importantly, the policy states that obviously we meet regulatory and statutory requirements in terms of the way what we can increase our rents to, but as a social provider, we've agreed not to increase our rents above the local housing allowance for any unit. And again, I'm happy to take any questions on the actual policy itself.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that, Mark. Please note for anybody watching, this is not actually setting the rent and the service charge. This is just setting out the parameters within which we can work this. So if anybody's got any lobbying about rent, tough. That's for another day. Ray, any particular comments, Squire? No, good. I've got a few. I'm referring to paragraph 3.7 in the report because it is quite interesting. Firstly, I'm expecting that the government will continue the last government's policy of essentially capping rent rises at the consumer price index plus 1%. The indications of that's for the next 10 years, which in itself is helpful in that it gives a certain level amount of certainty. That's excellent. But I would also note that in a discussion around rent controls and rent caps in the private rented sector, that the government has been capping social rents for years. So the idea that somehow this is an ideological problem is for the birds, I would say. I would also note that in the proposals to reduce rents by 1% each year, this is actually meaning we can't maximise the amount of money that we spend improving people's homes, which is a bit of a shame. But that's government regulation for you. But those are the parameters within which we work, and I think, Mark, it is sensible that we work within the CPI plus 1% policy, and if that requires it being put in, please put it in to the relevant policy once we get formal clarification from the Treasury, if that's okay. But as I said, this is very worthwhile and gives people the parameters within which to work. I only hope that it is extended to the private rented sector so that we allow proper rents and people to live. Also to say that what you said, Mark, about, thank you very much, what we said, Mark, about what you said about the local housing allowance is a political choice. We don't have to do this, but we choose to because we do not want tenants to pay more in rent than they should do. And that is not a choice I'm wishing to change unless the external financial problems, i.e. government cuts, mean that we have to. But we can't put that in a policy, because it's not policy, it's a political choice. I only hope the LHA goes up in line with fairness, and I expect that of this government. So, Alison, I think that we're happy with that. If you just put the thing in about the CPI plus 1% in the minutes, so it doesn't have to go in the policy because we don't know yet, that would be very useful. Thank you very much. Mark, thank you very much again. Good work. Next, the repairs and maintenance policies update. Adam or Steve?
That's me again.
Thank you, Steve.
So the purpose of this report is to update you regarding a review of the number of repairs and maintenance policies to ensure that we meet the requirements of the regulator for social housing. The background to this is all the policies were previously approved way back in 2014 and been regularly reviewed every 3 years. But with the introduction of the new legislation, particularly the Social Housing Regulation Act, but also the Building Safety Act, it has been necessary to review all the existing policies to make sure they meet the current requirements and consumer standards. So general policy updates. So all the policies, as I said, were previously approved, and this is really, a lot of these are just really put into a new format, as I said earlier, to ensure that they are consistent with all housing HMB policies to enable easy review for residents. Some of the key changes that has meant is that all the policies will include a summary of the policy together with the effective date. They'll detail the scope of the policy, including confirming the type of property that it actually relates to within the scope. The policy will confirm the purpose of each policy, and a key area is that they all have your responsibility sections, which details the resident responsibilities with regard to each of the specific policies. Residents will also have in their information about how they can provide meaningful opportunities to influence and scrutinise the policies and provide feedback. And the policies do provide links to all the relevant legal frameworks that they relate to. And residents will also always have opportunities to feedback and the details of how they can feedback with regard to compliments and complaints, and reference to the recently approved complaints policy are also detailed in each of the policies. So in terms of each of the individual policies, I won't go through the detail of every single one, but the AIDS and Adaptations policy, this policy outlines our approach to management of requests for aids and adaptations as recommended by occupational therapists. The key changes from the previous policy is really just confirming that all requests must be assessed by an OT. That if there are major adaptations, they will be subject to financial eligibility criteria, and also confirms that we've established a disabled adaptations panel that reviews the process, has complex and high priority cases escalated to it so that we can have oversight of anything that's going to cost over £30,000. It reviews our response and resources required to manage disabled adaptations, training that's provided, and review feedback from recently escalated cases and any changes to legislation. The asbestos policy is a policy that outlines our approach to the management of asbestos. The key changes to this policy is reference to contaminated land, so it outlines how we would approach that. And it has an additional requirement added to it from the previous policy, which outlines that for all void properties we will undertake a full management survey, and then this will generate an asbestos in your home report that will be provided to the incoming tenant. It also confirms residents undertaking alterations can request the asbestos in your home report, and also confirms that we have an asbestos safety panel that again reviews regularly every quarter our compliance in terms of re-inspection, training that's required and undertaken for our staff, and records any asbestos incidents that have occurred in the period and any learning that we can take from that. And of course any changes to legislation or guidance, particularly from the HSE. The charging for repairs policy is pretty much as per, apart from the general format changes, pretty much remains unchanged. The damp and mould policy outlines our approach to the management of damp and mould. This, as you're aware, was approved in February, so there's very few changes, but it does confirm a damp and mould panel that we have created that again will regularly review our response to damp and mould, training that we provide to our staff, and record any damp and mould complaints and disrepair claims, so again we can take any learning and any changes to legislation. The fire safety policy outlines our approach to the management of fire safety. Again, this was approved earlier this year in January originally, so again very few changes, but the policy does clarify that where residents have been identified that they are unable to self-evacuate, we will undertake a personal emergency evacuation plan, and has got some additional requirements in there regarding how residents should not store or charge mobility scooters, e-scooters, e-bikes or batteries in escape routes. And you'll probably be aware there have been some incidents recently in other authorities regarding charging of batteries and the like. And also, again, it confirms that there is a fire safety panel that, again, will meet regularly every quarter, review our compliance to fire risk assessments, training for our staff, any advice from our liaison meetings with Hampshire Fire and Rescue, record any fire incidents and any training or communication that we need to send out to learn from that, any incidents that we've had, and again, any changes in legislation. The improvements and alterations policy outlines our approach to managing requests from residents or leaseholders wishing to make improvements to their home. The only real change from the original policy is an additional requirement that if any of the alterations impact on a neighbouring property, we will consult with the neighbours prior to giving any permission. The repairs and maintenance allowance policy again remains unchanged apart from the overall structure changes to the policy. And similarly, the request to improve our properties remains unchanged apart from the general changes to the structure. And the right to repair policy, similarly, that also remains unchanged apart from the changes to the general policy updates. In terms of consultation for the order policies, again, they were all shared with the resident focus group on policies. Each of the policies was shared with them, and we received written responses which are in Appendix K, and we did take on board obviously some of those comments. Although generally positive, there were some changes that we did incorporate into the policies as a result of the feedback that we received. We also undertook a number of in-person meetings, and the resident engagement team again rang all the members of the focus group who hadn't provided feedback to get any other feedback they wanted to provide. Again, generally the feedback was positive. We also, particularly from some of the existing panels that we run, we did consult with staff around any changes that needed to be incorporated, and there was some feedback that we have made changes to the policies as a direct result either from feedback from staff or from residents. And some of the examples of that is the alteration policy, the requirement to inform neighbouring properties as a direct result of some complaints that we received where that hadn't happened. So that has now been incorporated into the policy. And the asbestos policy, some of the additional requirements that have been added to that policy as a direct result of some of the incidents that we have had over the last sort of 12 months. In terms of communication plan, the policies will all be on the PCC website, and we plan to have regular articles in House Talk confirming that we've updated the policies, but also to share some of the highlights and responsibilities that residents have with those policies, and provide any other advice. And with our own staff, there will be updates in the HMB bulletin to make all staff aware of where the policies are and the changes that we've made. And then we will continue obviously to review, particularly through the panels, any changes to legislation or guidance, and continue to review all the policies on a regular basis. I'm sure I'll be back here in the future reporting on some of the updates. Any questions at all?
Ray, do you have any questions at all? No? No, you've read all 9 of them. That's excellent. That's excellent news. Yeah, these are 9 policies, but it's really important that they're all updated. We are particular scrutiny with regards to things like damp and mould and fire safety. One of the things that I've mentioned previously is to make sure that every aspect we now have the Grenfell inquiry published, and the full horror of what went on has been unveiled, and we have to make sure that all our policies comply with whatever emerges from that. And so I think in consultation with the director and myself is to make sure that anything that emerges from that is included both in policies, procedures, practice, everything, okay? Because we cannot have residents saying, you know, the only way you're going to take any notice is if this place goes up in smoke, and then it goes up in smoke. We cannot have that. And that's one of the reasons why we have the housing regulator now. So feel free to incorporate away in liaison with the director and myself, if that's okay. I was particularly impressed with the focus group feedback. I was particularly impressed with the way in which we've actually outlined when we charge for repairs, because I think that seems a fair way forwards. You know, if someone's just smashed up their place, they can't expect a repair for free, and I think that's particularly impressive. But this is very good, and I'm looking forward, well, sort of, to this all coming back, but preferably not at once, over the next 3 years or so. But no, that's fine. So that means that there are 9 policies which cease to be draft and can be put forwards, But Alison, please include the little section about incorporating the outcomes of the Grenfell inquiry into the minutes as well, just so that we can make that aware. Aside from that, all 9 of them and everything else is therefore approved. So thank you very much for that. Steve. Next on our list is approving PCC safeguarding policy for the Housing Needs Advice and Support Service. Mike.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. So the purpose of this report is to seek approval to implement the new safeguarding policy for the HNAS service. So the background to this is that there is not currently a safeguarding policy in place. This is a new policy. That's not to say that the service has not been cognizant of its safeguarding responsibilities and not been working to ensure that its customers are appropriately safeguarded. The service probably deals with safeguarding issues for customers on a daily basis, whether that be supporting complex rough sleepers to find accommodation, whether that might be supporting people fleeing domestic abusive relationships, or finding accommodation for young people who've been made homeless suddenly. There's all sorts of things that the service does to ensure that its customers are appropriately safeguarded and supported through their contact with the department. This is about ensuring that our statutory responsibilities to safeguard adults and children are embedded fully into the processes that we already have in place. And it's also to respond to the work that we do with our local safeguarding boards. So respectively in Portsmouth, that's the Portsmouth Safeguarding Adults Board for adults and the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children Partnership for children. And with both of those boards, we engage with biannual self-assessments of our safeguarding work. We completed one for the Children's Partnership in the autumn of last year, and more recently we've completed one for the Adult Safeguarding Board. Doing those self-assessments, we have identified that there is a gap in terms of our work, namely that we didn't have a policy in place pulling together everything that we were doing and everything that we need to ensure that our officers are mindful of when they work with vulnerable people. So hence we've pulled together the safeguarding policy. So it sets out the key overarching principles which inform our work embedded in the legislation. It identifies the key safeguarding roles and responsibilities of specific officers in the service. It talks about how we will recruit and how we will carry out induction and training processes for new staff and for all staff working in the service, which will support the principles and requirements of the policy. And it will codify the processes in place which staff will follow at all times to appropriately report any concerns that they have, and how they will work with other agencies, partner agencies, together to safeguard our customers. The policy will be published on the City Council website, so it's available to the public, and it will be reviewed at least every 2 years, more frequently if there are changes in legislation or other work in terms of safeguarding which points to a need to update processes accordingly.
Thank you for that, Mike. Ray, did you have anything to add or comment or question on? Feel free if you have.
Just one. You said that policy will be on the website. Will there be a hard copy available for people that do not have the website?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that will be available through the service, yeah, on request.
Well, thank you for that, Ray. That's very kind of you. This is one of the most important policies we have, and like with other policies we discussed earlier, it is codifying normal practice, which is good. When people come to us, they need to know they feel safe. It's absolutely crucial. They come to the service when they are at their weakest very often, and they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. So we have to make sure this is a safe environment. I'm delighted that we've liaised with the 2 safeguarding boards and partnerships in some of this work, which ensures that we run alongside good practice. You say it is with immediate effect. That to me is as of 4:58 this afternoon. Okay?
Happily. Thank you.
That's very kind, because that's when this has been approved. So thank you very much, Mike, for that. And, well, I hope I don't have to see this again, because I'm sure it will be done as part of practice. Thanks, Mike. Right, we come to the last report, ye gods, which is just to update discussions with the housing regulator and various other things related to that. Nicola.
Thank you. So an information report was brought to you in February 2024 to update on the work that was being undertaken in response to changing housing legislation and regulation. Within that meeting, it was agreed that a further update report would be presented mid-municipal year. So this is that report, which provides the update with information on changes to the housing standards and the regulator for social housing's inspection regime, the continued actions taken by the service in response to the legislative change, the tenant satisfaction measures results which have been submitted to the housing regulator and resultant actions to be taken to the service, the complaint self-assessment submitted to the housing ombudsman and resultant actions to be taken. And the report also highlights the annual report, which has been sent to all residents and leaseholders in the summer edition of House Talk magazine, and there's also information on our self-assessment against the new standards. So the changes to housing standards and the consumer standards that all social housing providers have to comply with were published in late February and came into effect from the 1st of April, with the new regulatory regime against those standards launching from the 1st of April. All social housing landlords will be inspected against the new standards with an expectation of co-regulation, in that landlords must self-assess against the standards and self-refer to the regulator where there's gaps in compliance and demonstrate their plan for full compliance. The regulator has a range of tools to use to ensure full compliance with new enforcement powers. There's 4 regulatory grades which are outlined in the report, which is a C1 to a C4. C1 being that the landlord is overall meeting the standards. There'll be an awareness of work that needs to be done, but there'll be a commitment to doing that work. And C3 and C4 gradings identifying serious failings. At the time of writing the report, the regulator had published 10 regulatory judgments, which were 2 C1s and 8 C3s. As of today, 26 judgments have been published with 8 C1s, none of which are local authority housing providers, and 7 C2s and 11 C3s, 10 of which are local authority owned housing providers. Housing associations have been subject to regulatory regime prior to the extension of regulatory powers, which has extended to local authority landlords. Our work against the new standards and revised building safety regulation has been ongoing, with continued support from our resident consortium members and engaged residents who feed into the policy creation and review meetings and have supported our revised communication strategy, for example, starring in some new video content for tenants and creating information leaflets for residents to support adherence with building safety measures. In line with the Transparency, Influence and Accountability Standard, we submitted our results of our tenant satisfaction measures to the regulator in June of this year. This is in part management information on safety compliance and statistics on ASB and complaints, and in part tenant perception survey results. Our tenant satisfaction results measures have been published online and are within our annual report, with a resulting work plan featuring in that annual report. The annual report is presented in the appendix and has been sent to all residents in the summer issue of House Talk. The tenant satisfaction measures allow residents to compare our results with other housing providers. We were very proud of our perception survey results, but recognise that there's still some work to do, particularly around antisocial behaviour satisfaction, where we'd already identified and initiated changes to the existing service in a bid to achieve better outcomes for residents. In the February report, we highlighted the plan to move to our complaints management closer to our service and our new complaints leader's responsibility for landlord complaints as of the 1st of April. Our complaints self-assessment has been completed and submitted to the Housing Ombudsman in line with the new requirements and is presented in the appendix of this report, as well as having been published on our website. In our self-assessment, we highlight the outstanding planned actions which result from the transition from the corporate complaints team to the landlord service. As referenced earlier, we've completed a self-assessment against the new housing standards, and this is being revised and updated with learning following every regulatory judgment and ombudsman finding as they are published and highlighted areas for consideration. In line with the co-regulatory approach, we've shared our self-assessment with the housing regulator, advising on areas of strength and areas where we have a work plan which is being undertaken in our journey to full compliance with the standards, with details of mitigation that's in place in the interim to ensure that our residents are as safe as practically possible and receive strong services, which is largely reflected in our positive tenant satisfaction results. A brief outline of our self-assessment will be published on our website and is in the appendix of this report. It has been shared with resident consortium members with further communication planned for the winter edition of House Talk magazine. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Nicola. Ray, did you have anything on this? No? Okay, thank you very much. The reason we do this is our in-year reports is just to be open with our residents, because it's absolutely crucial that they understand what's going on rather than just wait years. I'm pleased that we've been proactive with the social housing regulator and have done a self-assessment and a self-referral. Many of the details and the year-end statistics in here are very good, I have to say. There are two where I'm looking forward to some improvements, one of which is around complaints handling, which, given that I, as the member for handling complaints now under the new regime, I'm delighted to see that about 53% satisfaction, and then obviously antisocial behaviour, because that's a real issue for many of our tenants and our leaseholders. And although I suspect that will be higher than many other people who are involved in this, we have to make sure it's higher again. We need to make sure people feel safe, and I'm sure that's part of the thing. A couple of other things just to talk about some good practice and some other practice which is related to this. The first is that I mentioned the Grenfell inquiry earlier. There are 8 organisations which are directly mentioned as having contributed to the organisation, to that particular horror. I have asked the procurement department of this council to make sure they don't darken our door. We have to wait apparently for public service procurement rules to change, but apparently that'll be soon. But we are very clear that those organisations have failed people in our view. The inquiry is very clear that they failed people, and as soon as we can, I've asked the procurement team of this council to make sure they don't darken our door. On a more cheery note, I was delighted this afternoon to be at a session of the community panel and the team that worked with Summers Orchard, which is an astonishing example of community engagement and shows what this council can do in terms of transforming people's lives and transforming people's aspirations. And it shows that if you actually listen to people, you'll get a better outcome. I'm delighted we've been able to do that, and I'm sure we'll be able to do that in future. And I'm sure this document will go a long way towards doing that. So I can't pass it because it's only for information, but I accept the information, Alison. And so thank you very much. And that is the last item on the agenda. And so I close the meeting at 5:07. Enjoy the sunshine and have a peaceful trip.